Hey YouTube, this episode begins with the install of an LSD, SureTrac R160. First drive, this happens. Current status of my clutch, shift into first gear, foot firmly on the brake, release the clutch. So, not great. Removing the clutch. So I've just disconnected all the bolts, the exhaust in the way, actually lowered the transmission. So here we are, manual transmission, 6-speed, and there's the clutch and flywheel. So once I'd taken the clutch out, I realized that there was really nothing wrong with it. No extreme wear, no mechanical failure. Since I already had it out, I decided to take it apart and see how it worked on the inside. But after a bit of brainstorming, I realized the cause of this, no power clutch slipping condition was, in fact, one of the rear axles that I had installed into the new differential hadn't been seated fully. And when I was driving, I must have gone over a bump or some kind of elevation change, and that was enough to wiggle it loose. So once I thought of that, I looked under the car in the rear, and sure enough, that rear right axle was popped out just a bit. So the clutch replacement was for nothing, but that's how it goes sometimes, and it's a good lesson in trying all the easy things first. Currently using the lawn sprayer pressurized to pump gear oil through the dipstick hole right there. It's working pretty well. It's not fast, but no gear oil fill in this car has ever been fast. This is probably among the fastest. One of the next parts I'm installing in the car is this oil to water heat exchanger. So coolant flows through one of the main radiator hoses through this assembly. Oil is always flowing through this assembly. And because the inside has a lot of fins and a high amount of surface area, the temperature transfers between the two of them. Water heats up a lot faster than oil when your car is cold. So once it is warm, it'll start to warm your oil up thanks to this heat exchange. And then eventually, water will be kept at its set point thanks to the water thermostat and your huge radiator. And oil will continue to heat up past that point, so it'll begin to cool the oil. I want to install this unit instead of the front-mounted oil cooler because I want to see the car warm up faster in the winter. I also don't want to rely on the installation of a thermostat to control that oil temperature. This actually will function like it has a thermostat thanks to the thermostat controlling the water temp. So the easy way to install this, and it's about 10 inches long, would be to mount it right here in this upper radiator hose. It would be a very tight fit, but unfortunately it's just a few inches too long considering these bends. So probably would only fit a unit about this long before the hose fittings, and this one's just a bit longer than that. So the plan is going to be to cut this hose, turn it downwards, and actually have the unit resting kind of at this angle. So it'll go down, make a sharp V, and come back up to here. I'm thinking I will use this very radiator hose, just make a cut, maybe loosen these and make the turns that are necessary, and then everything should be installed. So now the two ends of this severed hose have drained a little bit of coolant out. The heat exchanger fully clamped to this V-shaped hose, which is currently bent out of shape, and to the original radiator hose, also bent a bit. I still got this clamp on, although I have loosened this one, which allows me to rotate the whole assembly. So I've pre-filled it with some coolant, and I'm ready to begin lowering it into its final position. All right, it's finally installed. That was way more trouble than it was worth trying to do this in place. In particular, squeezing this rubber hose over this proved to be extremely difficult. I had to end up disconnecting it from here, spilling a bit more coolant, and then jamming it on there. Then it fit. The other thing is the orientation of these is pretty much set, like even before you put the clamp on. It's incredibly difficult to twist these. So the way I've installed it, there's very little clearance between this fitting and this hose. I'm not too concerned because this can be pivoted a little bit, but I do wish I had installed it in like this orientation rather than rely on twisting all the hoses. Let's see, as far as fixing this, it's actually touching the dipstick tube, so I think I'm going to put some sort of a clamp around this and call it good. The radiator hose itself provides quite a lot of support. Even without anything securing it, I think it would be okay. And then, yeah, I'm gonna... I don't have a coolant fill bucket handy. I think I'm gonna pick one up. But for now, I'm gonna pressure test the coolant system just to make sure there's not like some sort of a weird leak somewhere. I topped off the reservoir. So, yeah, and then I think later I will install the oil hoses. The bumper is off once again so that I can remove the oil cooler I had installed last month and reroute the lines into this one, the heat exchanger. I think this will be pretty straightforward. The lines may need to be shortened some, so we'll see how everything shakes out. I definitely don't want too much line here to risk getting tangled up in this belt. So the heat exchanger is in. I've got the oil side connected to the, I guess, outlet from the oil pump. Now I've got one more hose to connect this guy into the outlet of the heat exchanger towards the, I guess, engine. I can't remember if this is all pre-filter or not. I'm gonna say it's probably all pre-filter. But yeah, so I'm tightening this last AN10 fitting. Use a wrench on that one. And then I'll figure out a way to secure all the hoses. But with that, I've got some oil in here, some air in these two lines. And then the next time I go to start the engine, I'm going to crank it for a while to help prime the oil system. And then probably even activate the EcuSump, which is still holding pressure from the last time the car ran. So yeah, all good. The heat exchanger is installed, the coolant system is bled, and now I want to prime the oil system. So I'm going to start cranking the car while it's in neutral until I see oil pressure build up downstream of the, well, I've got a lot of sensors. So anyway, once oil pressure begins to build there, we know that the heat exchanger loop has oil. Okay, so we can see it building, oh, just barely. That is pre-heat exchanger, by the way. So I'm gonna let it rest. As you can see, there's, okay, a little bit of pressure now. Post cooler. Now it's got pressure everywhere. Now I'm gonna fire the EcuSump. A lot of pressure. There we go. Actually started up the car now. So, wow. Not a big pressure drop through the heat exchanger, which is great. So at this point in the Supercharger project, I realized I was kind of hitting a dead end, making, just over 3 pounds of boost, not a huge increase in peak power. So I did a lot of research into what else could be done, like further, smaller Supercharger pulleys or larger crank pulleys in order to push more air and make more boost. The size of the Supercharger would be a big limiting factor, even if spun at a higher RPM, so I set my sights on different Superchargers entirely. Here's a glimpse at some of my research into commonly available Superchargers and the expected power gains. Also comparing whether they'd be within their efficiency ranges at the RPMs I'd be spinning them at. What I found was the SC14 used by Toyota in the early Toyota Previa minivan It pushes about as much air as an M90, but comes with a larger clutched pulley, which kind of captured my interest, the ability to switch a supercharger on and off, so went ahead and ordered one. The used Toyota Previa SC14 supercharger just came in, so I get to see the size difference with the M65 unit. It is considerably taller, and also the inlet and outlet ports are opposite, so one at the top and one at the bottom, so that's going to add a lot to the height as well. But not too bad. And here's what the lobes look like. They're a lot bigger, but they are a simpler design. There's no twist to them, so it's just two lobes. So right here you see the top of this cross shape corresponds with the top of this lobe. As I turn it, there's another lobe, and there's that first one again. So another thing about this supercharger is you can run it clockwise or counterclockwise. It just changes the inlet and outlet direction, so it's basically a symmetrical design in that regard. The mounting situation will be interesting. So there's clearly these nuts for the stock flanges. Don't know what these are. There's a clutch connection. That's interesting. And but it looks like the main way it's meant to be mounted is through these bolts. So imagining this bolting on like an alternator into some sort of engine block casting. So that's the SC14. The clutch appears to work correctly. I heard a clunk when I connected the power to it, and there you see the pulley turning. Okay, now let's disconnect it. Yeah, pulley no longer turning. So before I fully dismantle the current supercharger setup, my, oh man, I even forgot what it was called, M65 Eaton supercharger from the Mercedes. I'm going to dismantle it because I want to install the SC14, but yeah, before I do that I want to capture my own thoughts so I can look back on this as kind of a review of this setup. So for what it's worth, it's been very usable and very smooth. I really like the mid-range torque that it makes available. I guess the main limitation with this setup ended up being the cubic feet per minute that the supercharger is able to deliver, which wasn't that many. Probably good for about 200-ish horsepower. I'm gonna say generously at the crank, and yeah, so putting this setup on an FB20 like a Crosstrek would make for significant gains, like 40 or 50 horsepower, really like transform the vehicle entirely. Putting it on an FB25 maybe only gains a tiny bit of peak power, but where most of the benefit was in that mid-range section. This was a car that, if you were cruising in 6th on the highway and you floored it, nothing would happen. Like, absolutely nothing would happen. Like, you might gain 5 miles an hour in like 10 seconds, but you certainly wouldn't be doing that, expecting to get around anyone, within a minute or anything like that. And even then, if you were on like a 55 mile an hour stretch and you wanted to accelerate up to, 70, 75 to pass someone on a 2-lane road, that you'd really have to plan for. It was almost like an unsafe maneuver because of how long it took. And I do think that both of those problems are fixed now. The other thing to note, obviously, is this supercharger is always enabled. There's no clutch on its pulley, so you get the supercharger whine all the time, like as you can hear now. With my efforts to muffle it, I think it's perfectly livable. I mean, there's just this new noise coming from the engine, but it's not much louder than the engine itself. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. And then one other thing I want to do before taking stuff apart is try to record a couple 0 to 60 attempts. So I wanted, ever since I put the Supercharger on, to actually do a back-to-back comparison of like NA versus supercharged. Once I switch to the SC14, that should be a pretty trivial undertaking, since I'll have a switch that can just declutch the Supercharger. So yeah, this will serve as my, recorded, how good was the M65 Supercharger setup. So I'll get us to a more secluded road and we can try a couple of accelerations. But yeah, what else? So after I put in the limited slip diff in the rear, I noticed just a ton more rear traction in snow. Before, I felt like if I flicked the car and floored it, eventually one of the rear wheels would break loose and you'd have some fun, slide around a bit. Now it's, yeah, they don't really want to break loose. They're just like, yep, let's just accelerate now. But yeah, let's do a quick acceleration run. All right.